One of the things as we planned for this morning we really wanted to delve into is this idea of empathy and how that works in the recovery process and rebuilding the relationship after there's been some betrayal and been some acting out outside the relationship. So to talk about that, first I want to talk about what kind of gets in the way of it, of really doing the healing that we need to do. And one of the things that sometimes gets in the way of this is condemnation. And condemnation seems to really take two forms. One is I can direct it at myself, in which case it takes me to a place of shame, and that moves me away from being able to heal the relationship. And the other is I can be directing it at my partner, in which case that takes me to a place of being judgmental. And from a place of judgment, it's also difficult to heal the relationship. So I've really never met an addict that once their acting out came out that wasn't sorry about it. So I want to talk a little bit about what does that mean that I am sorry. And because I think this is really important for the healing process. One, the first thing was I can be sorry because of the consequences. I can be sorry because something bad happened to me when I got caught. The second thing can be I can be sorry because of shame. And the third one can be I can be sorry from the standpoint of empathy. So looking at those individually, that first one is I'm sorry because I regret the consequences of what happened to me. And if you really took this in its really purest form, if that's all I've got is that I'm sorry because of the consequences, we might even say that would be being antisocial or almost sociopathic, if all I really care about is the consequences to me. And this usually isn't the position that we have somebody when they walk into our office. This would be pretty rare for us. But much more common at the start of the healing process is this position of shame, where I regret what this says about me. I regret what a horrible husband I've been. I regret what a horrible wife I've been. So I regret it because of how bad I feel. And I can be feeling kind of bad. I can be feeling bad about what I did to you, but in this position of shame, there's still a big chunk of this that's about me and about what's happening with me. So ultimately where we want to get to is this idea of empathy, where I've moved from I regret what I did because of what it says about me, because I'm a horrible person, to get to where I understand what this did to you. And I deeply regret the pain that I caused you and the damage that it did to our relationship. So as the addict gets healthy, and you've probably seen this in a lot of your groups, there tends to be this movement from being in this position of shame whenever your partner gets triggered, to being able to empathize. But a couple of things I want to point out about that process is, one, it's not a binary process. And what that means is I'm not completely in shame or completely in empathy. I'm not just in one or the other. There's always a little bit of both of that going on there, and we want to be able to increase the shame and decrease the empathy. The other is that the process isn't linear. That is to say, any of our healing does not just march us step by step by step from brokenness to healing. It's always a hard-fought battle with setbacks and times of getting triggered again. And so it takes time to move from that position of shame to that position of healing, and we don't do it real smoothly. We can be doing really well, and all of a sudden something happens, we have a blow up at home, and we're right back there where it's about that I'm a terrible person. So along that line, it takes a lot of courage to do this. Because to be able to sit with your partner's pain, particularly if you know that you are the cause of it, is not an easy thing to do. It takes a lot of courage to sit with that. And very often, when we're in addiction, we tend to be more avoidant of those really deep, painful feelings, those soft feelings. We understand our anger, anger we get, but the sadness, the hurt, the fear, the loneliness, those are a little harder for us to sit with. So it really does take taking that deep breath and being able to be there and go, this isn't about me, it's about you. That's not an easy thing to do. So we could draw an analogy and say this really is sort of similar to our relationship with God. Shame causes us to hide. It gets in the way of restoration. When the fall happened, one of the first thing that happens is God comes walking through the garden, and what does the man do? He hides. Right, so when we're in that shame, and he hides because I was ashamed, because I was naked, it gets in the way of us restoring. Empathy is the companion of repentance. It's an acknowledgement that we violated the relationship and hurt our partner. So we want to have not only empathy for the partner, but we want to have some empathy for what the addict goes through as well. And there's some things that sometimes get in the way when we're trying to build this empathy in the relationship. And the first one is for partners, they don't want to let the addict off the hook. Because whatever you did, it wasn't okay, So we don't want to be saying that what happened was okay, and so that can get in the way of the empathy. And then we don't want to be enabling to the partner. So many times for partners, it feels like if I empathize with his struggles, if I empathize with her struggles, am I opening the door for this to happen again? And I don't think I could do that. That would just be so devastating. I couldn't survive one more round of this. So that gets in the way of it. But along the way, we want to build that empathy to get to the point where the partner can also recognize that the addict himself or herself is really wounded too, and really has their own pain. And as the relationship gets stronger, and the addict's able to move into empathy, and the partner starts being able to move into empathy, we can get to where it doesn't feel quite so scary to be able to empathize with your pain and what you're dealing with. So fault versus responsibility. So for partners, let's differentiate between what's your fault and what's your responsibility. What your partner did isn't your fault. Just like if you got hit by a drunk driver, if you're the victim, it's not your fault. But you do have responsibility to get treatment for your injuries. So you want to get the help that you need to be able to work through that. So let's talk for just a moment about what this looks like, because I keep referring to this empathy, 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 but what does it actually look like? So one of the things, most often I end up working with men, and one of the things I really try and coach them on is when your wife says something to you, and you see the storms brewing again, try to learn to respond to the emotion and not just the content. What I've heard from more than one man is my wife starts to protest about all the groups I'm going to. That you're gone so much, I'm having to carry all of the burden of this. Or I had one incident where the man had a relapse, and the wife starts saying, well, the group, that group that you're going to, you guys just sit around and talk about your acting out, and then you go act out. And he calmly explains to her that this is an important part of my healing, and I am very much committed to this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But to go one level deeper to say, this is really so scary for you right now, the thought that I might have another relapse and act out just feels so overwhelming to you. And to be able to sit with her pain and respond to what's happening underneath there without defending can be really powerful. So don't defend. And you can always just reflect what you believe your partner's feeling. And as for those of us in the room who are therapists, we do that all the time. You tell us something and we reflect what we think you're feeling. You can do the same thing with your partner. And you don't have to be right 100% of the time. Because if you get it wrong, your partner will tell you. So if you say you seem like you're really sad right now, and your partner says, no, I'm angry, they will tell you. So that's how that will work. So for both the addict and the partner, we need to be prepared to cope with our partner's reactions. Because empathy can be really healing. It's an important part of the journey. But it's not a panacea. It doesn't automatically wipe out everything that happened. It's not an antidote where once you do this, I'm never going to be angry with you again. And in fact, you may at that one moment when you're being empathic with your partner, that you could get hit by just a wave of anger right then. But getting that out and being able to sit with that is a very powerful thing to do. So your partner's pain is not immediately dissipated just because you empathize. And you're still going to have times where the anger, hurt, and sadness comes back, and you'll have to do it again because it's a healing journey. It's not just a balm that you put on one time and it's cured. Then the thing that, even if you do this, we have to recognize is the 5 guarantees, which are, you're not responsible for how your partner responds. You're only responsible for what you think, feel, and do. So I cannot control, nor am I responsible for what my partner thinks. I cannot control, nor am I responsible for what my partner feels. I cannot control, nor am I responsible for what my partner does and how he or she chooses to respond to me. And this is the big one. If I try to control or take responsibility for any of the above, I will become frustrated, angry, resentful, discouraged, and or bitter. What I do have control of and am responsible for is what I think, feel, do, and how I respond to others. So with that, rather than have questions right now, we are actually going to move into a role-play demonstration.
So Denise here is the addict, and she's sitting in the chair here. And then Trina is her thoughts. So you'll hear whenever Trina speaks, it'll be like it's her brain speaking. And then Steve is the spouse, and I am his thoughts. And then first what we're going to do is we're going to do an unhealthy example. So this will be kind of an unhealthy take on probably what it looks like in many homes, unfortunately. And then the second one we do will be the healthier, oh hey, they're starting to get some empathy. I haven't heard her mention anything about her recovery group in a while. I'm not sure our relationship can make it through her sex addiction. Sometimes I wonder if she is even really going. Maybe she's just using that time to hook up with somebody she met on the internet again.
So how was group last night?
Oh, here it comes again. The questions. Oh, I'm just sick of being grilled like he's some kind of detective and I'm a criminal. He never lets up on me. I can't even get to the grocery store without him giving me the 3rd degree. No matter what I say, he picks it apart. Why do you want to know?
Are you kidding? You've put me through hell and caused me so much humiliation, and now you're not going to answer a simple question?
You know, I have the right to know what's going on. Hey, you know, I'm your husband.
The heck? I'm an adult. It's ridiculous they want to check in on me all the time. It's like I'm his child or something.
You're such a control freak. God has a good plan for us, and I don't understand why you just can't get over it.
She really is nuts. You don't just get over a thing like this. Our lives would be so much better if she would just admit this is her problem and stop yelling at me for being concerned.
Hey, did you go to group last night or not?
I can't win. He's never satisfied. I'll just tell him to shut him off.
I went, but that's never enough for you. Do you want to check my cell phone and my computer while you're at it too, Dad?
I haven't heard her mention anything about her recovery group in a while. I'm not sure our relationship can make it through her sex addiction. Oh, sometimes I wonder if she is even really going. Maybe she's just using that time to hook up with somebody. Somebody she met on the internet again.
Did you go to group last night? How was it?
I really hate it when he starts asking me questions. It usually leads to more and more questions, and I feel like I'm on trial. Wait a minute. Let me pause for a moment to gather my thoughts. Okay. But try to see this from his perspective. Maybe he's scared and worried.
Why do you want to know? I mean, are you worried about my recovery and our relationship? This must feel really scary for you. Well, group went okay.
Wow, I guess I didn't know how I was feeling. But I guess that I think about it, I'm kind of worried. But she still didn't really answer my question that well.
So I guess I am worried, and I do feel better when I know more about what you are learning, and I feel responsible to make sure you're getting to group. I also haven't seen you work in your workbook in a while, and I feel better when I see you working in it.
He seems overly vigilant and like he just wants to control my actions. But maybe it makes sense that he's just feeling really powerless and scared. I can see how he would feel reassured to know I was at my group and working in my book.
I imagine that if the roles were reversed and you were the one in recovery, I might feel powerless to control your recovery work, and that would be very discomforting and scary for me. I am sorry that I brought this pain and betrayal into our lives.
Wow, she's really trying hard to understand where I'm coming from and what I'm feeling. This feels really different than usual. I even feel encouraged and supported somehow.
It means a lot that you can hear how hard this is for me. I feel like you care about me, and it means a lot to me that you're trying to be open with me. Your willingness to talk helps me feel you are putting effort into your recovery. And now that I think about it, I remember seeing you leave with your books last night.
Wow. Reducing my defensiveness seems to be working. Maybe my group leader was right. Maybe there is hope for this relationship.
I deeply appreciate your openness. I know it's been devastating for you, and seeing how much I've hurt you makes me really sad. It also motivates me to work harder and hopefully support each other in attacking the problem instead of attacking each other.
Maybe there is hope for this relationship.
So yeah, we, Trina and I, are wanted to share with you guys some tools that you can use in your groups to help your addicts and partners be able to empathize with each other. So we've got some specific worksheets that you can actually bring to your people and help them work through to really understand the position of their partner or the addict. So we're going to walk through a couple of those with you guys, and then hopefully you can take some of these home and apply them in your own group. Katrina's going to start with a tool here for the addict.
Okay. So we have exercises for the addicts to use to build their empathy for their partner's position, and then we'll present exercises for the partner to do to build empathy for the addict's position. So the first one we have is the addict empathy exercise, and I'll show it to you. So on the front is just directions, which I will just go over verbally. Don't spend your time reading it right now. The back is the part that's important. So on the back are lots of bold words that a spouse experiences when they're living with an addict. They often experience the addict's lying and deception, irritability in the home, lots of blaming, the infidelity, of course, exposure to STDs and danger, being used, a feeling of having been left to handle all the household responsibilities, or just used for sex instead of being loved on intimately, mostly being used to kind of pick up the pieces that the addict is off doing his addiction or her addiction, isolation, rejection, broken promises, spiritual doubts, fear, and just living with a lack of loving kindness day to day in the home. So these are just some of the things that a spouse lives with pre-discovery when the addiction's going on. So what we would want to do is give this to the spouse first, and you want to have another spouse give it. You don't want to like go to your addict groups with this tool and have the guys give it to their wives or the wives give it to their spouses. And wait, am I getting lost?
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay. So to say, you need to have more empathy for me. Why don't you work on this? That's what you don't want to do. So you want it to come from, a person in the same shoes. So, and you give it to the spouse first, so she or he can highlight what's been true for them, because not all of these are true for every single person. Maybe they're going to highlight every single one. Maybe they're going to highlight their choice few that have really been a hurt to them. All right, so they've highlighted what's meaningful to them. Now it goes back to the addict, and the addict gets to spend time, and the front says, go slowly. And it specifically says handwritten, not typed, because there have been a couple of studies showing that when we handwrite things, our thoughts deepen, and the process slows down to more feeling level. If you're typing, it's all head, 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 head. So it says handwrite, go slowly, and you take the first one that's highlighted, and they're going to write out the little prompt phrase. So for lying, they'll handwrite, I purposely deceived you in so many ways. ... So then they can fill in ways they did it. They're owning their behavior. That validates the spouse's experience. They weren't crazy. They're not overreacting. The front explains the two goals. You want to validate by owning what you've done, and then you want to put yourself in your spouse's shoes and really try to get a sense of what was that like for them to be lied to. How would that feel to me? And so then they say, and I imagine you would have really felt a lot of this or that, or it would have been like this for you. The front instructions list a few feeling words to pick from, but you want to get to the feeling level. And so slowly they do a paragraph or so on each highlighted thing. Probably would take more than one sitting, depending on how many are highlighted. And then that can go back to the spouse, and maybe they'd have a time where that was read out loud. In session, I would have this be read out loud with me there, and to contain and to help them connect around the feeling level, to build empathy for what the other person experienced.
So kind of building off of that exercise, it's somewhat similar but different. It's this piece of paper called the partner validation exercise. You guys all have that. And this exercise, I'll just kind of run through it with you, but it's for the same purpose, to help the addict really understand and kind of share the ways that they try to manipulate their partner in the middle of their addiction, the ways that they either use to hide things, or often what happens is the addict will in some ways make their partner feel responsible or guilty for their behavior, kind of trying to play mind games a little bit to make them feel like, oh, it's your fault, that's why I'm doing this. So this is ways of admitting those things and taking ownership and admitting that to the spouse. So I'll read through it here with you. So your partner will have a hard time clearly seeing that they weren't in some way responsible for your offending behavior. So they'll think, there's some way that maybe they're responsible. Maybe that they weren't enough for you sexually. Maybe they weren't desirable enough to you, or they weren't a good enough spouse. So in some way that they were a failure, and that's why the addict had to go and do these things. And so in this exercise, explain how you encouraged him or her to feel partly responsible for the results of your behavior. Often the way you behave during the abuse encourage your partner to feel guilty or wrong. So then use the following questions to help you address this confusion that your partner may feel and reinforce the truth that they were innocent. So it's really about empathizing with them, understanding admitting what you did and how that must have felt for them, and then really emphasizing their innocence and that it was fully the addict's responsibility. So what the addict will do is he or she will go through these 5 points, and you can write it out. Write it out. So the first point is explain the ways that you purposely tried to confuse your partner so that he or she would not know about your abusive actions, or how you would keep them in the dark about what was really going on. So kind of announcing the ways that you purposely tried to confuse your partner. Number 2, explain how your distorted thought processes allowed you to violate your own boundaries, sexual and relational boundaries, within your relationship. And then example, the distorted rationales about higher risk situations, like, oh, I could, how you rationalized it. Attitudes or thoughts which triggered your acting out behaviors. Just the ways in your mind that you kind of rationalized it or made it okay. You told yourself, oh, this is okay, I can just do this, it won't be a problem. The third step is explain things that you said or did to make your partner feel responsible for your moodiness, your lack of control, and emotional neediness connected to your abusive behavior. So the ways that you really kind of made them feel responsible for your mood. And then the fourth step is, this is kind of where you synthesize it all. You express your regret to your partner for those above behaviors and reflect what it must have been like for them in that position. So the goal is to show them that you understand and validate their pain and that confusion that they felt. It's really just kind of getting into that. Wow, that must have felt like really scary for you to think, or really you must have been really angry that I would put this on you, or confusing. And then the last part, 5, is to share with your partner. So this is another sharing exercise. At least 5 warning signs that would have prevented you from engaging in your abusive or destructive behavior if you paid attention to them. So what are the stop signs, the roadblocks that you just kind of hopped right over, and if you had really looked at it and paid attention to, they would have stopped you. So you admit that. So it's really about admitting, owning, understanding how your partner would have felt, and then just offering that up to them and getting inside their shoes. That's really a good way for the addict to gain empathy for their spouse.
A couple other tools before we go to the other handouts could be really helpful if you've got one addict group in your church ministry and another spouse group going on, to pick someone with some solid healing. Maybe it'd just be the leader, maybe it'd be somebody you're watching to raise up to leadership, and they can go visit the other group and present what their shoes have been like to walk in, and share with it. Maybe a spouse would share with the addict what it's like to get triggered, what it's like to live with fear, what it's like the first month of knowing, and how physically their body just reacted and shut down, and what it's like to live with these waves of rage they've never had before. Or an addict could go to the spouse group and share what it's like to be caught up in an addiction and share the pain side of that the spouses have a hard time seeing. And so that's a really good tool too, to start building some empathy. People can hear it better when it's not their wife or husband telling them. So to bring another person in to share. Another great important tool is to externalize the problem. So the problem's no longer you bad spouse being so mean to me when I'm doing all I'm supposed to do, or you bad addict having brought this into our lives. So you want to externalize it so the couple can stand together and fight a common enemy. You can do it a couple of ways. There, in 12-step recovery groups, they talk about the disease of addiction, and now we're both, against the disease. And then on the spiritual realm, Ephesians chapter 6 talks about how, I love that verse, our enemy is not flesh and blood, but Satan and his desire to destroy the marriage. And so we can both come together and just fight against the destructive purposes of the enemy instead of seeing each other as the enemy. So even just using that verse and spending a group talking about that helps bond the couple and stop them from blaming. And that will make a space for empathy.
Creates a common enemy.
Yeah.
Rather than each other as the enemy, they can both shoot for the other enemy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you start wanting to build empathy with spouses, for the addict, where am I? What you want to do is you want to wait. You don't want to start that right away in the beginning, because the spouse is going to be so wounded and so overwhelmed with anger and fear and just tons of emotions to deal with. So you want to wait many months until the initial months of that big angry wash that comes at the beginning starts to die down, and there's a space to consider, wow, what must it have been like for you? But if you start too early and say, you need to have empathy for your partner, whoa, the backlash, they're not going to be ready for that. So the empathy building for the addict starts right off the bat because they need to be there for their hurting spouse. But the empathy building for the spouse is going to start later in the game.
If you think about it, the more that the spouse is able to express their hurt, the more that they can get into that anger and hurt, then the sooner they'll be able to get to this process, of being able to empathize with the addict. But it takes a long time
when they
to
get
work
to
that
the
out.
hurt, past the anger.
Yeah, to the hurt, past the anger, right.
Yeah. So, let me make sure I'm getting everything here. This is the one you especially don't want to have that any addict present to a spouse and say, you need to start building empathy. This is the one you want to come from another spouse, maybe their group leader or a friend to a friend. So, a good one to start with is to go over, and this is a great group tool, the prodigal son story. And just because I'm curious, how many of you, I know this is preached over and over to preach the forgiveness that God has for sinners. How many of you have connected deeply to the older son's role? Okay, three or so of you? Yeah? So I found that to be true. People haven't often really sat with the older son's role. So the front of this worksheet just has straight from the Bible the prodigal son story. So we all probably know that. But the back has some really good discussion questions for spouses to go through in a group. First, you want to do the easy one to lead them in, which character seems most like your addict spouse? Well, that's easy, The guy who went off, and it says right there, he wasted all his money on prostitutes. It's pretty clear. And then you can give them space to talk about the similarities so that they can bond and start seeing, this makes a lot of sense. This story fits our picture. And then you want to lead them into which character are you most similar to? And we've only got the loving-hearted, welcoming father, the sinner, and the good one, right? And so they're left with the good one because I did everything right. I'm a good Christian woman. I never cheated on my husband. I waited to meet a man in church. So this is what I hear from the wives a lot. There's so much anger. So they're going to have to say, wow, I'm like that older one. So let's take a look. How so? They can talk about it. And then the next question is, what keeps that older son from joining the celebration? And it's there in Scripture clearly, and they can pick that out. But they're also going to go with it and kind of start talking about what keeps them from welcoming their spouse back. What's the block? And it says the father entreats the older son to, come on, join in the celebration. Receive your brother with me with joy. And then you want them to process joy for what? Like, why should I be happy that my spouse is back or my spouse is in recovery? I'm dealing with all this frustration and devastation. Where's the joy? How does the older son's response reflect your own bitterness? And right there in the story, the son's response is, look, Dad, all these years I have served you, and I've never disobeyed your command. You never gave me a goat, never threw me a party. So there's this bitterness, and that comes up a lot for spouses. I did all the right things, and look what's happened to me. And so they can talk about that and relate to that. The next one is the son complains that he served and obeyed for years, but there's no celebration. Oh, okay, we just did that. And then the father has an answer, and it reflects a distortion in the older son's thinking. The father says, oh my gosh, we've been together all these years. I've been loving my time with you. I wish, I hope that you would have been loving your time with me. It's about our relationship, and all I have is yours. That means you could have had a calf any time, you could have had parties. This is kind of, there's something about your stance here that's kept you from enjoying a love relationship with me and the joy that's there. And so it helps the spouses get in touch with maybe a little bit of the Pharisee legalistic stance that they are thrust into with this discovery. Suddenly you're the bad one, I'm the good one. And that's really legalistic because really we're all broken sinners and we're all hurting people and we all need grace. So to help them move out of that judgmental stance. And what's interesting is an addict and a spouse are on a continuum of legalism, really, and living under law and judgment, because the spouse feels shame, the addict feels shame. That's a position of law and judgment and condemnation. Often the spouse feels self-righteous judgment, and that's a position of the law and fairness, and there's no grace for either of them. So a big part of the goal is moving people into the kingdom of grace. And then there's room for empathy. So what new thinking do you imagine would help the son to move into a different relationship with the father? How might that even affect his attitude toward the younger brother that came home? And then how can the group pray for you about this right now? So it's trying to help spouses realize I'm not so perfect. My self-righteousness is really devastating too, and I need to change inside. So that's a good setup for the next one, because if you just hit them with the next one, it can be really painful too. So you got to use judgment and where each person is in the process, right? The next exercise is to help a partner build empathy for what it's like to live with an addiction. And you guys know, sometimes you don't even know you're in pain as an addict. You know, you're just living that life and it seems okay. I mean, sometimes you're aware of the pain, especially once discovery comes and it's all out, you start realizing, oh my gosh, I was living with so much stress. Oh my gosh, I have so much shame. Wow, I've been so isolated and cut off from life-giving relationships. And now I've got fear because I can lose my whole family. And there's so much loss, all this lost, pieces of life. And then hatred. Now I'm feeling a lot of hatred from my spouse. They're hitting me, they're throwing things, they're yelling awful names. There's so much hatred that I'm having flung at me. So it's really hard to be an addict and bear up under all this. So what we want to do again is ask the addict to highlight what's true for them, give it to the spouse to go journal on. Write a paragraph with these prompts, putting yourself in that other person's shoes. So for example, the stress. You juggled so many lies, fell behind on so many responsibilities, and stuffed so many emotions. If the spouse is handwriting this, it's going to help them slow down and consider. The stress and tension of all this must have been, and then they put themselves in that shoe and try to imagine and try to feel it out. So they go through, they write this out, and remember what Scott shared, that one hindrance to spouses showing empathy or allowing themselves to have empathy is the fear that that gives permission, or that gives the okay to the behavior. So at the bottom, I'm actually going to add to this at the bottom. At the bottom, to reassure the spouse and to be real to the addict when they share this, even though I have compassion for your suffering, I do not choose to give up my boundaries of self-protection or offer cheap trust. And the thing I'm going to end up adding is because I don't want to experience the shame, the stress, the isolation, self-loathing, fear, loss, and hatred of addiction in my home, in my life, either. So, because what's interesting is both partners end up dealing with all this exact same stuff. And so, these are some tools to help move the couple into caring for each other instead of fighting against each other.
I'm Aaron Reinecke, the director of Reinecke Counseling Associates, and introduce yourself.
I'm Denise Barrett. I am a marriage and family therapist trainee specializing in working with wives and spouses of sex addicts.
I'm Corey Anderson, and I'm with LifeSpring Center and marriage and family therapist intern, working with sex addicts and families, really. So I work a lot with teens as well as adult men, especially.
And I'm Trina Nash, and I'm a licensed therapist specializing in sex addiction, and I work with wives and female sex addicts.
I'm Andrew Last, and I'm a marriage and family therapist intern also, and I work predominantly with male sex addicts, and I lead a group for men in recovery, and I also work with the couples and families as well.
I'm Scott Wood. I'm a marriage and family therapist intern with LifeSpring Center. I do some work with men who are sex addicts, but I do a lot of work with the couples as well, and also do some trauma work also.
Okay, so now we have received some questions from the audience,
So this question says, this is from a partner. What if the addict talks too much and you feel like they don't take to heart your concerns and he or she is lying about any or most of the questions you ask? So I think this, there's a couple parts to this. One, if the addict is doing most of the talking, then that's a sign of him him or her needing to do the empathy building, because they're, it's good for them to talk, but listening is really crucial to hear their partner's pain. So that shows a dynamic needs to change there, where they're willing to receive the partner's pain. Often they talk out of their own not wanting to hear their partner's pain. It's scary to them. So really trying to work on that dynamic change, that's an important part, and as you as group leaders can work towards helping them to listen, take a listening role, an empathetic role, as opposed to a just a talking role. And then really not taking to concerns, taking to heart the concerns of their spouse. And that's what all these exercises are designed to do. Really take it to heart what their spouse must feel like. But if he's lying, and he truly is lying, then that's a question of, is he really in recovery if he's really lying? And that's a place for the partner to set some boundaries around lying, and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. And that's where if there's lying going on, that truly is lying. Now sometimes there can be a dynamic where the partner is kind of still in that, what do you call it, something of grace and something.
Oh, still in that
kind of
legalistic.
Yeah, sort of a
condemning.
legalistic stance, condemning. And so I've seen it before. It's not always true, but where when the partner's so hurt that he or she continues to put the addict into a corner with all the questions peppering them. And sometimes there's no right answer to the addict can say to do anything. And so they can also kind of sound like they're lying when they're just backed into a corner. That's also where the addict needs to learn to be strong and to set some of their own boundaries and just share what they're really feeling, and not have to back away and deny and minimize. So there's a lot of dynamics involved in that, but mostly if someone's lying, then that's really a sign of recovery needs to really get stepped up a notch, and accountability needs to happen. Anything else want to add to that? Or
I thought Andrew's answer was excellent. The thing I would add to that is, as we look at couples work, so I mean, there's a number of layers to this. There's the question of, is this person really still lying and acting out? But let's assume that this person really is committed to treatment, and that you as the partner still tend to get triggered because things just bring it back, and then that's just really scary. What ultimately we want to get to with couples is we want to be able to be where your partner is the person that you turn to for comfort and support when you're really hurting. So we want to get to a point where you could turn to your partner and be able to say that it's just, I'm just having one of those days where I just really get scared that you're going to be acting out again, and have your partner be able to hold that with you. Now, where this question sounds like that couple may be a ways from that, and if the addict's already doing their own work and the partner's already doing their own work, there may be some room where we need to do some couples therapy as well to start being able to hold that together and be able to get to where that attachment starts really feeling safe again. Because ultimately that's what we want. We want their relationship to be emotionally safe for both people, where that's the person that you cling to.
Sometimes it's hard to do it in isolation, right? The addicts is his treatment, the partners in their treatment, but if they're not doing a little bit of couples work at the right time, a therapist or even you as leaders can help them to grow in that empathy in the moment, which can be challenging without some assistance.
Yeah, at our center, we want the couple, if they come into treatment with us, we want them, of course, to do their own individual work in counseling. But right from the beginning, we want them to do some couples work along the way. And as recovery develops more and more, then there's more and more couples work that happens as we go along. And that's just the typical process. And then secondly, I would just like to add that as the addict hears the pain from the spouse, we really try to help the addict to get a different way of thinking about hearing the pain from the spouse or her spouse. That what is occurring is that the spouse is risking trusting the addict enough to share the pain. So that's hard for the addict to get a hold of. That because it just feels like I'm getting cornered here. But really, what's actually happening is that the spouse is trusting the addict enough and believes that the addict is going to be there to share the pain with him or with her. All right. So if the addict can get that change in mind and then see it as an opportunity to build closeness and connection instead of a threat, that's what we're working at. That's what all recovery is really about with couples, is helping that shift to occur.
I have two questions that are kind of the same question. One is, how does my wife get these empathy building handouts? The other one is, what kind of handouts can I go home and use with my wife? So I hear that some of you were really, oh, I'd love my wife to kind of work on some empathy. For me, I've been working hard too. So that's hard, and I'm thinking, if she's in a group, and lots of you guys are, I think you guys are leaders of ministry groups, and I'm hoping there are spouse groups going on in your church at the same time, or at least some of the men in your group have wives that are just one-on-one ministering in the area. And you could bring these handouts to the spouses group and say, hey, I was at the S.A.L.T training, we got these tools, this might be really good for the whole group. Or even that wife ministering one-on-one that you know of, you could give those to her to use as she talks with people. But unless you and your wife are at a place where there's a lot of safety and empathy building that's already happened, which these questions tell me maybe hasn't happened, I just think coming from an addict is going to get a real backlash and not go well. So another tool you can use to encourage it is, I know it helped me. You can invite your wife to go with you to an open S.A.L.T meeting. And when they go hear the stories of other sex addicts, what they're going to hear is the two things they need to hear. They're going to hear, after several sessions, they'll start getting it, oh my gosh, addiction is so dark, dangerous, powerful, destructive. I don't ever want to live with it again. And it's going to help her get stronger boundaries and be a healthier person. And she's going to hear, and while my addict spouse was involved in that, that was a dark, awful place for them. So it can really build compassion and empathy for the position of an addict while reinforcing, I don't want addiction in my home. And that's a healthy stance too. So I'm not going to live with addiction again. I want recovery in this house. But at the same time, wow, that must have been really hard for you, and can enable empathy building. So hearing stories from other addicts, again, would be really good. And the last thing I had to say was, I don't know if offering a book, you guys get your feedback, because here's a handout, it's kind of more focused and intense, but maybe a book could ease into it. And there are a couple books that you might be able to give me feedback, but to be able to say, honey, I know this has really devastated you, and I thought maybe this book might help your heart. And so you're going from an empathy position yourself. The more you develop your own empathy, the more her defenses are going to come down too. So that's another way to help. But books, there's a Christian one called Sarah, and then there's a one by a wonderful therapist, a leader in the field, Claudia Black, called Deceived. And they start off saying, they paint the picture of the pain of the spouse. So she gets validated, he understands what's just happened in their lives, is it for the spouses. And then they gently, gently hone in on how did you end up in a relationship like this? And kind of help take the eyes off blaming the addict and back on how can I grow from this. So that might be a way to.
Can I add something to that, Trina? Oftentimes when these circumstances happen, the family's thrown into a crisis and the focus is on the addict. And the spouse experiences a great deal of trauma, which often isn't recognized readily and quickly. They need treatment as much as the addict does. So it's really important that they have access to a support group. Trina and I do a support group every week. There's support groups, and if you can't afford therapy, but therapy is really helpful for wives, and wives need that as much. Yes, yes, spouses.
Any partner
I'm sorry.
to an addict, yeah.
Spouses need that as much.
Yeah. Well, I was going to build off of Scott's analogy that he brought up earlier of the car crash, and yeah, it's not your fault as a spouse, but you're still injured. You still got very injured in it, and it's your responsibility to take care of those wounds.
I would add, all of those are excellent answers. I would add one other thought that occurred to me as we were talking was when we talked about the 5 guarantees, that I can only be responsible for what I think and feel and do. And so I would suggest listening to that would be, one of the things would be to start really practicing this yourself. Mm-hmm. And some of that anger should start to dissipate. It won't automatically go away. And the first time you do it, you may get just barraged. But if you can have the courage and you can have the strength in yourself between whatever work you're doing and the support system around you to be able to sit with that when your spouse brings that at you, then you can start being the healing agent there. And again, couples therapy can be great with this, because a lot of times what we find with couples is we get into these negative cycles, where we just start, we're operating up here, attack, or somebody attacks and somebody withdraws when things get heated. And we see the anger coming at each other, but what we don't see underneath there is there's often sadness, there's hurt, there's loneliness, there's fear, there's even sometimes despair down there. And if we're just operating up here on what's happening, we don't get down here, it's really hard to bring about that healing. So one of the things, if you can start reacting to what your spouse is, and I say react, responding to is probably better. Responding to what your spouse is feeling right then, and just recognize that and be able to hold that with him or her, that can be a huge step towards healing.
Yeah. Good. And I just call our attention to this addict empathy exercise, that if you're here and that question sounded like it was from an addict, the original one we were just reading and responding to. And of course you want empathy yourself, of course, as an addict. But the best way to get what you need is to give, right? There was this guy named Jesus, he said, give and you shall receive, right? So if you start, as all of us have kind of chimed in on, if you start with giving empathy yourself, and this handout here, the addict empathy exercise, is very, very powerful, a very powerful way to do it. And then also Andrew's handout as well. If you really work at it yourself first, then you're going to, over time, in all likelihood, you're going to receive what you need in return over time.
And this question isn't necessarily focused on couples, it's kind of the opposite, but I'll be able to tie it in and talk about it some. The question is, what about empathy when an addict is single? It's a good question. I get a lot of guys, maybe late teens, early 20s, late 20s, even 30s, whatever, that are single and dealing with this. And I guess the place that I would start is, I had a teacher once tell us, the group I was in, that addiction is rage against self. So there's a deep place to start right there, is that the addict is actually violating their own healthy boundaries. So there's a place to develop empathy for yourself. I know it sounds kind of maybe gushy therapy kind of talk, but it's really important if you think about it for a moment, about the necessity of that care for yourself, and how you don't feel such a you don't feel like you're worth the time, the effort, the money, the whatever, to seek your own healing. So there's a lot of, in a sense, empathy that needs to be developed for yourself, and I'd say grace as well. Another place that I go with clients, so that one can take a long time to work on. That's going to be a continuous work, deep work. But another important place is empathy for, in the realm of acting out. let's just say it's something like pornography. Well, there's some empathy to be developed there for the people on the other side of pornography. If it's images or videos or chat rooms or whatever, those are all people. Those are all people that are coming from hurt and pain and trauma and shame. And they're not there because they're healthy, fully functioning, really enjoying life human beings. They're there out of hurt and pain and shame and all those kind of things, or exploitation. And so developing some empathy for those people as well, I think is a big component. And then thirdly, the third area I focus on is within whatever relationships that single addict does have, whether it's with friends or family or whatever else it might be. There's, there can be a sense of, or a lot of times with addiction, there's isolation that occurs, there's irritability, there's shortness, you're not really fully you, and so those people around you are going to get affected. And so it takes a little bit of digging in to look at how that happens and look how those relationships are affected. But I think a lot of these same exercises and principles can apply to some level as well of addressing that and helping you be healthy, even as a single addict with the people around you, whether it's close friends, whether it's your mom or dad or brother or sister or whatever it might be. So.
Yeah, I would just add that addicts who are single, it's not all that different than addicts that are married in this sense. That the first person you're going to get the empathy from that you need to get from, the support that you need and so forth, is typically not going to be your wife if you're married, or your husband if you're married. Maybe right at the beginning a little bit, but typically you're going to get into a support group or a therapy group or some counseling or whatever it is. You're going to get what you need in terms of empathy and support that way, just like a married person would. So if you're single or married, it's really the very same process. It's only later that you're going to get if you're married, you're going to get more empathy over time from your spouse. Okay? So don't think of it in terms of that since I'm single, I'm in such a hugely different place than everybody else. Not really. It's the very same process that you're going through.
Everybody's probably heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. A lot of times we just call it by the initials. And it was really originally discovered around combat veterans, that they would come back, and what would happen is things would trigger them that would put them back in that situation where they would experience all over again that fear that they had when they were in a life-threatening situation. And we've also found over time that people who are in other types of life-threatening situations, they too can experience post-traumatic stress disorder, where even after a long time after it's happened, there's still things about that experience that when they get triggered, when that happens, can put them right back in that experience, and they know it, and they're there again with all that fear and all that anxiety and everything that goes with that. And when you think about it, in every life we have some amount of trauma. Some of them are traumas with a capital T, the big life-threatening things that happen to them, and some are more small t traumas that that just accumulate in every life. When you remember what it looked like, you remember what it smelled like, you remember what it felt like, you remember where you were feeling it in your body, you remember the emotions you were going through, you remember what it tasted like at that particular moment that disturbing thing happened to you. Well, many times for a partner, when the discovery happens, it can be that trauma with a capital T, that remembering exactly what that feeling was like. So over time, when the partner gets triggered, they could really be just right back there in that same moment when they discovered it, with all that fear and hurt and anger and rage, and they don't necessarily do it on purpose. It's just something that happened because of how the brain recorded that moment as traumatic, that it's just there. So you may find a partner that gets triggered, and you're thinking, we've been through all this recovery, I'm doing all this work, why is this still so fresh for you, like the day it happened? Why are you not getting better? It could be that really it's just being reported, it's been reported as trauma. And many times with trauma, we have some other treatments we do with trauma in addition to our normal talk therapy, because sometimes insight on that is not enough to make it go away. I can understand it very well what's happening to me, but it still means that when that thing happens, it triggers me, I still go right back there, and right away my anxiety shoots up to a 10, and I am just so afraid and so hurt, and I don't know what to do with it.
And I was thinking that would be a really good tool. We don't have a handout, but you could make a handout for addicts that explains the PTSD symptoms. They're online, and then they can know what their spouse is going through, and that too can build empathy and help handle those triggers instead of taking them personally, to help see the fear and the pain underneath. So just educating addicts about PTSD is a great tool to help build empathy toward the spouse too.
Because what I often find, and we often find, is that when that happens, you know, the addict and the partner feel like, hey, we're making progress, especially the addict. He or she is trusting me more, making progress, I'm excited, and then all of a sudden something happens, and boom, she's right back there, he's right back there in that place, and then the addict gets really discouraged, like, oh no, like I thought we made all this progress, and we're at day one. Well, understanding that PTSD is a reality, it means that, well, you're not really at day one, but just right then at that moment, she's been brought back to that place, or he has, and I can be empathetic with that rather than thinking, all my work has been for nothing, you know, getting discouraged. Just being empathetic with the partner in that is really important.
I've seen it where the addict can bring it back to day one, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
The addict responds without any empathy, with really, you know,
Yeah.
feeling shamed and criticized and wants to attack back, then yeah, it feels like it is day one. But I've seen it also where the exact same scenario, an addict responds with empathy and compassion, and it's really now a step forward. And it's something new.
Yeah.
The spouse has experienced some support now from the addict in that pain, and now it's a growing moment rather than a resetting moment.
Opportunity for healing.
You know what I've picked up from several wives lately, because I'm working mostly with wives of addicts, is along this theme actually. So, you know, the addict is so overwhelmed with all the anger, and that addict needs support. So he texts his buddy or talks on the phone or goes to support him. He goes, oh my gosh, I can't stand it anymore. She's always so angry with me. I don't know what I can do. Why does it last so long? And they go on and on. Well, somehow at some point a lot of the spouses hear about that. They find a text, or they overhear a phone call, or they get a whiff of the group talked about wives and how hard they are. And it hurts. It really, really is like a wedge in the relationship, because the spouse is saying, you know, if he would just, like a tagline, my wife is so angry, she's just been yelling at me all day. The tagline being, but I can understand it, I really did hurt her badly. Even when you're seeking empathy elsewhere, that's just a mindset to develop. I get it, and then that would be healing, because yeah, you know, I mean, these spouses feel bad when they belittle and when they throw things and hit. They feel shame about that too. I hear all about it. So they get that you need a place to be supported, but they also want the other half of the coin to be there, so they know there's empathy. And they feel like they're being painted as the bad guy now. And that feeds the anger. Well, you're the one who did this, why am I the bad guy? So you know, it'd be really cool to help the people in your group get a whole new mindset, whether they're talking with their spouse or with somebody else, but the mindset is, yeah, I've been having a hard time, this is tough to deal with. I get where she's coming from, I get why he's this way though, I did blow her. I know they're hurt so badly. That mindset, more than just saying the words, because you're supposed to say the words, but that mindset is an empathetic mindset that brings healing, clears the way for now the spouse to develop empathy also, instead of being defensive and angry. So maybe that's another tool, teaching a group to have the tagline. Right?
Well, and I think even if they do maybe send out a text like that to a accountability partner or group leader, to have the spouse recognize, hey, that is a bonus. He's reaching out or she's reaching out in her anger and frustration, and so that's a positive. But then, maybe trusting, hopefully the group, trusting the accountability partner that that person's going to correct what was said too and add that tagline for the addict.
The addicts, they can encourage each other.
Remember to add the part,
You
that
remember
I
why
understand
it's
what
like
she
this?
did, what he did, yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question for the panel. The question is, how many times do you think, from the beginning of healing for a couple until the end, until there's really a full healing that occurs, how many times do you think that the addict needs to allow the spouse to fully express the spouse's hurt and pain and anger? Do you think is it like once really well, or is it a few times, or how many times do you think typically in a typical situation it's going to take? Over some 6 months or a year or longer, but how many times does the addict need to be there for the spouse in that way?
It's like hundreds of times.
Yeah.
There's unlimited amounts of time.
I think I was thinking of a couple of guys who I've worked with for a long time, maybe 2-3 years, and I'm not consistently working with them now, but just checking in and hearing exactly that of going, okay, I did it. I was able to respond well. It was a tough one, it was a close call, but I caught myself and I responded well. And so it can still even be something that the addict is working on a couple of years. Sobriety, all this other stuff is going great. And acting out and all that is really going well. It's now still trying to get that to be the new mindset because it's been there for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of a metaphor, and I don't know why seeing a picture would be life-changing, but the metaphor is an oil painting. If I see this beautiful oil painting that just struck me so deeply with awe, and you know how you can be touched by a scene, a landscape or something, and say it was just so meaningful to me that for my partner to really get me, I want him to see this too. And so how long would it take to describe that picture so that they see it too? Probably first I'd give a big overview, and then later I remember that lake in the distance, and I start describing the lake and how it sparkled, and then another day I tried to talk about the tree, so the big picture is going to come out, and you want to make sure you get that big picture, and then later I'll remember a certain piece, and maybe I want you to know the metaphor is a beautiful one, but really it'd be like the pain of that piece or the pain of that piece, until I know that you see the picture too, and now we're on the same page.
And there's layers too. A good oil painting has like 5 different layers, or I don't know, I'm not a painter, but there's many layers. So each layer has its own specific meaning and meaning to the artist. So.
Spouses continue to trigger, somewhat, not that different from how an addict triggers. They trigger over various things, and they will often want to go back and open up the subject and talk about it again. And that's important.
Often, like 20 times?
Once a day?
25?
Initially, it's much more often. Initially, it can be several times a day, initially. But as time goes on, as the healing process goes on, it becomes less and less and less. And, yeah.
So I ask this question because so often addicts, what happens is that we think in terms of doing it right, getting it right, and doing it well, and then, whoa, I did it. And now we're there.
The binary part, like Scott was talking about, on and off.
It's either there or it's not there. And there's been so many times over the years with couples in my office where I really help them reach maybe one of the very first times that they really do it really well, and they experience that kind of attachment and closeness, and really bearing one another's burden, as Scripture says. And it's really sacred. really sacred. And then after we talk that through a little bit and they experience that, and then I ask them this question. And I say, you know, from my experience, you're going to be going through this a number of more times. And maybe it's going to be 37 more times. Maybe it's going to be 47 more times. I'm not sure, but it's going to be a number of times. And each time, you can grow in your ability to attach in that pain that you're experiencing. Because if you, as a couple, can learn how to attach in that pain, then you are going to be attached and connected for the rest of your life together. Because if you can do this attachment well, nothing else is going to touch you as a couple. And so it can be a really powerful, empowering experience to really do it well once. And then to recognize that, okay, here's the opportunity. The next time it comes, it's just an opportunity for me to deepen and strengthen the attachment that I have with this woman, this man that I really want to spend the rest of my life with. To help him, help her experience real safety and attachment with me. Because God is able to do extraordinary things. And the very person that hurt that spouse, God is going to use over time to comfort that spouse. It's powerful.
Here's what happens a lot. When something disturbing happens to us, it gets trapped in our brains with all the original sights, sounds, feelings, emotions, bodily sensations, everything in that moment. There's something about that moment that just gets stuck with us. And you have this great prefrontal cortex up here that does all of your higher thinking. It's a beautiful piece of equipment that you have. But back here you've got this amygdala that is a little bit more primitive part of your brain. And what seems to happen is these disturbing events, they get trapped back here. And so you can understand it really well. You can talk about it, you can understand it. But when that moment comes and that trigger comes, it can still put you right back into that moment. If that's happening, often what we do is we'll look at some alternatives to talk therapy. One of the things that's done really well for treating trauma, and the research has been really good on it, is something called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Typically you'll hear it referred to as EMDR, since that's a mouthful. And essentially what it involves is getting back to that memory and really focusing on what's the most disturbing thing in there, and using either eye movements or tones or tapping. We're essentially just giving bilateral stimulation to your brain and allowing your brain to do its own healing. So it's really just a healing process to allow your brain to do the healing it needs to do around that memory. It's not hypnosis. You're not going into a trance state. It's not taking the memory away. You'll still remember it, but what it does do for you is it takes away the punch that memory has. Oftentimes when in our work early on, we might ask somebody to do an exercise where they give us their 10 best and 10 worst memories. And with that, it's not about the day, or the bigger picture, it's about that moment. What was the moment that was either the really best thing or the worst thing about it? And what's the thing you think about? What's the thought you had about yourself? So in that one moment when I was really in danger, my thought was, I'm not safe. When I think about it now, it still has all this power over me. On 0 to 10, how disturbing is it? Well, it's still a 9 to me. Or it's still a 10 to me when I go there. If that's still happening over time, that's something we probably want to target and see if we can remove some of its punch. So some of this is going to heal in relationship. Some of this, if your brain really just reported as traumatic, we may need to treat it as trauma and do some EMDR work.
Personally, I like to start with what I'd say least invasive, right? So typically therapy isn't as invasive as maybe psychiatric work where you're getting psychotropic medications and things like that. So, and we as therapists are trained to help sort some of that out as well and know when it's important to recognize when to send someone in for a psychiatric or medication evaluation. So that would be kind of the course that I would recommend is go to a therapist, send that person to a therapist, let the therapist kind of sort through some of that stuff and then send them on.
Another part of that is typically they're best used in conjunction with each other. So oftentimes just using psychotropic medication without therapy isn't the best recommendation. Usually it's good to do both because then you can work on the underlying issue within therapy, and you work on some of the symptoms or the biochemical problem with the medicine, and they work really well together. Sometimes just in isolation, the biochemical approach. It can be, depending on what the issue is, but it's usually best to work together in that.
So to gain more empathy, what are the signs that in a group you would look for and say, oh my goodness, this person needs, of course, therapy, but they need psychiatric help? In other words, what are the symptoms? I mean, I can look it up on the internet, but I can...
There's not a medication to give more empathy. Unfortunately, there's probably a lot of spouses out there that would be handing that out, right?
You know what? I think what I'm hearing is a frequent, just not aware of the difference between psychiatric help and therapy. So a psychiatrist prescribes medication. They're a doctor, and so they just give meds. They don't listen to your story. They don't help you have insight or work on it. A psychologist is authorized to do testing, like intelligence tests, learning disability tests, personality tests. They do testing, and they do therapy. And therapists do therapy. So you got 2 classes that do therapy, 1 class that gives meds. So psychiatric help to us means they're going for medication. You can't medicate to have people have their hearts warm and open toward other people. It's for anxiety or depression or psychosis, those kinds of things. So this would be therapy stuff, although there's a lot when there's depression going on that influences the ability of empathy for others. So that's why Andrew said it's often helpful to have both.
Yeah. Well, again, I just go back to the kind of, I would recommend therapists first because especially for something like depression or anxiety, depending on the level of it, there's a lot of work that can be done in therapy without even going to medications that actually does start changing some of the brain chemistry.
So in other words, don't advise nothing, tell them first go to the therapist.
Well,
I mean, you could throw it all out. It's all helpful, for sure.
You could always, we often will ask in our initial assessments, particularly if somebody's coming in with depressive symptoms, when they've last seen a physician and had a physical examination as well. Because we look at what does it makes us who we are. You know, there's a biological component to who we are. There's a psychological component. There's a sociological component. There's a spiritual component to who we are. And so, you know, in therapy, we can kind of address the psychology. We can look at social and what your support group looks like, and we can even address some of the spiritual issues that you're working with. And all of those are certainly good for therapy. The piece we can't really deal with, where we have to get them over to a physician or a psychiatrist, who's also a physician, is the biological piece of it. If we're assessing and thinking there's really a biological piece to this depression, to this anxiety, something like that, or if they were actually having, I don't know that you're going to see this in the group, but if they were having psychotic symptoms as well. But then we're going to want to have them have a psychiatric evaluation as well.
And I'll just pitch in that before, if I'm seeing someone, before I send them off to a psychiatrist for some antidepressant medication or anti-anxiety medication, just as part of my routine assessment, I asked them, like Scott said, about how long has it been since you've had a physical examination and blood drawn, and take a look at the blood levels, and take a look at the thyroid, how the thyroid is working right now, see how the adrenal glands are working right now, because both of those and other things can really affect mood in a big way. And there's been, over the course of the years I've been doing this, there's been a number of times where we've caught a thyroid problem or an adrenal problem through a blood test, and those things got addressed, and the depression began to change as we were also doing therapy. So we know that there are times when medication is necessary for anxiety and depression, but there's also a bigger picture to take a look at, and that's what therapists help people do, is take a look at the big picture.
I think a couple of things. One, we try not to bring this up too early because it's a little discouraging, but the overall process for healing and moving through recovery, and I'm talking, doing everything, working hard in therapy, groups, connected couples therapy, all that kind of stuff, is a 3 to 5 year process. So 4 years, okay, he's in it. That's the part 3. That 3 to 5 is really a lot more focused on the couple part and working through that. The other big factor is how much work has been done by each person, right? Like we've heard some different questions about, well, the different questions kind of alluded and almost clearly stated the fact that maybe one or the other in the marriage aren't really doing that much work. So that's going to slow down the process hugely. Especially like you're saying, I think that's a very foundational point of going, yeah, you got to be ready, 20, 30 years down the road to be able to give that good empathic response. If he's being really resistant, he is, as the addict, being really resistant to giving that response and not really taking that on and learning it and becoming a new way of reacting and responding, well, it's going to be harder for his spouse to also respond and be more gracious. So it's going to be more drawn out.
There's also one kind of, maybe a good resource for some of your groups is, there's a video by Dr. Doug Weiss, and he's a Christian therapist.
Good one.
Yeah, it's called Helping Her Heal. And it is for addicts to understand what their spouse has gone through. I think it's used in he or she. So the addict is the male in the way he does it. But it is very in your face. He doesn't mince words. He uses some pretty harsh analogies, but it really, I use it sometimes with guys who are defensive and don't quite understand what they've really done to their wife and how much pain it's caused. And so it's a real empathy building tool. It's in your face, but I think it can be really powerful. It is real powerful for some guys who are able to receive that.
He addresses how long the process is too. He said he really encourages the addicts to be patient and let it take as much time as it takes. So.
Be a great thing to watch in your groups with you guys.
Oftentimes these traumatic wounds kind of piggyback on something that happened earlier in the person's life. Oftentimes wives kind of get stuck, and so we can't really emphasize enough the importance of support therapy, support groups, whatever we can do for the wife to help her, or the spouse. I shouldn't say wives because that's mostly what we deal with, what I deal with, but for the spouse and partner to get the right support and to get the help that they need. Because they can get stuck, it happens, they can get stuck and just keep going, in circles, and so we work to prevent that.
And so often, the spouse will, gladly give the addict the extra time and the extra money, to get the help that he or she needs, right? And kind of neglect herself or himself, right, as the partner. And so it's important for the spouse to understand that they need help too. They were just run over, and I need some therapy to get back on my feet, or else I'm going to be walking with a limp the rest of my life, and that's not a good idea. And I need to take care of myself. And it's so often that the addict's recovery is maybe a step or two ahead of the spouse's recovery. It's not always the case, obviously, but that reality has to also be mentioned, that we really want to support the whole system in getting better as a whole.
Just to draw a little semantic distinction, there can be a real tendency as the addict to feel like this is my penance for what I did, that my spouse is angry with me all the time, and that's just my penance and I deserve it, and so that's what I've got to bear up under. And for those of you who are addicts working with spouses, who are living with spouses who are still trying to recover from this, I would encourage you to just shift that thinking to where it's not that this is my penance, but that I want to try and be the healing agent here. I want to be the one who can now speak healing into her life or his life, and what the case may be, so that it's not just it's not pushing you back into that place of shame where this is my burden to bear, but that it's actually calling on your life to be the healer.
We do have some recommendations that we can make. We don't recommend it in every case, but as we're working with couples, it's often a part of the process. And the dynamics have to be correct in the relationship, where it's not used to try to punish anyone, and it's used when there is a solid commitment on the part of both people to move forward in the relationship. And it's done after and a part of disclosure and not a part of discovery. So that discovery being the spouse finds out this information and wants information, and I want to take a polygraph right now because I want to know exactly what happened. And we slow that down, and we want to wait until the addict has done enough work and the spouse has done enough work so that the addict can come to the spouse with all of the information about what has happened, and do it in a way that shows real respect and empathy for the spouse, rather than the other way around where the spouse is, all the energy is coming from the spouse to the addict. So the timing of the polygraph is really important, and sometimes it's necessary and important, and it sets up healing to happen a lot faster. But we also have to wait for the right timing overall in the relationship.
I'd also add real quick too that we see it more as a trust-building tool rather than kind of an end in itself of going, okay, got my polygraph answer, we can either, I can divorce you or we can stay married. It's really, it can just be a small tool.
I hope this has been helpful to you folks here, and for those that will be watching the recording in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.